Dear students, I welcome you all to this lecture titled Karl Marx on Alienation. The main objectives of this lecture are to outline Karl Marx's theory of alienation, to understand the various forms of alienation, to highlight the connection between capitalism and alienation, to read alienation as a subsidiary concept in Karl Marx's critique of capitalism, to explain the role of state in alienation. The concept of alienation was first introduced by young Karl Marx in the economic and philosophical manuscripts in 1844, and it was subsequently expanded upon in Das Kapital, his seminal work on political economy. Marx's research on Hegel gave rise to the concept, but he maintained that Hegel's spirit was nothing more nor less than human action itself. Hegel felt that history was the expression of the movement of spirit operating behind the backs of historical actors. Alienation is a process when an individual's labor is transformed into a force that governs and controls them. The root cause of this alienation is commodity fetishism, or the idea that lifeless objects or commodities possess human qualities and can control human behavior. It is a common misconception to categorize the alienation of labor that occurs specifically in capitalist societies into 4 different categories or forms. Instead, it is a singular, comprehensive reality that has multiple interpretations. The 4 aspects of labor alienation in capitalist society in the economic and philosophical manuscripts are: first, alienation from the labor product; second, alienation from the labor activity; third, alienation from one's own humanity; and fourth, alienation from society. This classification stems from the notion that all labor involves some kind of action that results in a product of some kind, carried out by a human and not a machine in a social setting. At its most abstract, alienation can be seen broadly as a surrender of control through a detachment from a fundamental aspect of the self, and more precisely as the detachment of an actor or agent from their own agency. The separation of the majority of producers from the means of production is the most significant kind of separation that occurs in a capitalist society, and the one that eventually underpins every other form. The majority of individuals do not possess the tools required to make goods. In other words, they lack the resources required to generate. Instead, a few people own the means of production. The majority of people only have access to means of production when they work for those who own them, producing under conditions that are set by the producers themselves. Marx, therefore, does not intend for alienation to refer to either a mindset or an individual's sense of powerlessness. For Marx, alienation is more than just a subjective state, even though it can be experienced, understood, avoided, and even resisted. A capitalist society would not be possible without the process of alienation. People must be placed within such a structure and, much better, must learn to accept it as normal and right. This is the essence of capitalist society. Eliminating this organizing structure that separates producers from the means of production is the only way to end alienation. Thus, there are objective and subjective aspects to alienation. It can happen to you without realizing it, just like alcoholism or schizophrenia can happen to you without realizing it. However, nobody can escape this state in a capitalist society without escaping capitalist society. Marx claims that alienation occurs even to capitalists, but they perceive it as a state as opposed to the workers' activity. Now let us turn to the four parts of alienation. First, alienation from the product of labor. A primary kind of alienation is the alienation of the workers from the object of their labor. The worker loses out on what is produced by them in a capitalist society. Objectification becomes the loss of the object, as Marx put it. The object is a loss in the most common sense, that it is produced and then becomes someone else's property in the same act. Here, alienation assumes the very particular historical shape of worker-owner separation. Anything that the workers developed is quickly taken ownership of by someone else and is consequently not under their control. It can and does turn into an external, independent force on its own because it is not within their control. They create something that is hostile to them, in addition to losing ownership over the product that they manufacture as a commodity for the owner of the means of production. They make it but do not own it. The owner has authority over them because he owns what they make. Not just goods created for immediate use are being discussed here. In a nutshell, what we are discussing is the process of producing the means of production. Workers produce the means of production while owners have exclusive control over them. The more productive power there is for someone else to own and control, the more the workers produce. They give someone else the ability to control them. He exercises his control over them through the things they have produced. They can labor for 40 or 50 years if they are paid, and at the end of their life, they will not have much more than they did at the beginning, nor will any of the co-workers. All of this work, where has it gone? Much has gone towards the reproduction of the means of production on behalf of the owners and their power, but much has also gone towards providing for their needs so that they can continue to labor. Therefore, the society grows wealthier, but not the people in it. The second aspect is alienation from the activity of labor. The second part of alienation is when the workers lose control over the activities of their labor, or simply alienation from the labor activity. They lose control over the process of producing the things that they make, as well as the thing itself. Whatever they do is not self-expression. There is no connection between their activities and their desires about what they want to do, how they want to express themselves, or who they are or want to become. Their relationship to the activity is limited to its ability to lend them a shelter and fill their stomach. It is only a method of surviving and preserving oneself. Marx contends that in alienated labor, people are dehumanized to the degree of animals, creating merely to satisfy their bodily needs and working merely to fill gaps in their physical needs. When they are alienated from their own activity, it also indicates that someone else is in charge of it. The decisions on what, how, when, and with whom they will act are made by someone else: the foreman, the engineer, the head office, the board of directors, international competition, the global market, and the very machinery they operate. Additionally, someone else makes decisions about what to do with their goods, and for the majority of their life, they have to do this. Forced labor is created out of what they have a contract to perform. But what should essentially be a free, conscious activity? It is forced by both their need and the owner's ability to meet their requirement. They thereby relate to their own behavior as though it were something foreign to them and not truly theirs. They don't really belong there, doing this over and over until they can't really process anything other than the passing of time before they have to leave. One person's behavior turns into theirs. Life becomes a choice between working for others and getting away from work, which we refer to as leisure. Activity itself gets a negative reputation, since their own life activity starts to feel like an alien force controlling their lives. And when they are with themselves during their spare time, they usually steer clear of it. Since activity is a form of compulsion, free time itself often comes to be associated with being free from activity. Freedom is often associated with the antithesis of productivity and activity. It is consumption or simply thoughtless, passive pleasure or simply venting. Such an association between leisure and idleness exists only in class societies, when engaging in alienated labor is self-denial rather than self-expression. Every one of human abilities is marketed. The youth are referred to as the most precious resource and human resources, but these terms are only catchphrases for the same reality that labor performed by humans is turned into a commodity that can be bought and sold just like any other. By the time the pinnacle of capitalism is reached, human functions might become more dehumanized than those of a tool. A worker becomes a cog in the massive machine of production, an accessory to a machine. The third part of alienation is alienation from the self. The alienation from the product and activity of labor leads to alienation in its third facet, which is alienation from oneself or from the core of humanity. Not just the product turns into an alien force. Not only does self-expression turn into self-denial, there is an internal loss of self. The worker loses their life activity, which is their very self. It is to transform into someone else. The feeling of losing one's identity or purpose is a reflection of an actual loss of humanity, or, as Marx refers to it occasionally, of being estranged from the human species being. Marx also addresses another facet of alienation from oneself, which is mentioned in passing in the manuscripts, and it is the alienation from sensuousness. Marx views the development of human senses as one of the main aspects of the history of human labor. Human senses are not passive devices, a sort of black canvas that the outside world imprints with varying degrees of clarity and intensity. According to Marx, sensory experience itself is the result of a historical subject's laborious effort. Thus, the history of an active subject gives rise to the sensuous forms in which we see objects and their relationships. The senses themselves are not fixed, rather, they are subject to learning, expansion, improvement, formation, and reformation. It makes sense to talk of a sensuous alienation if the senses themselves are a byproduct of the process of human collective self constitution. Our daily lives are estranged in a capitalist world. Because of this, we almost entirely participate in activities that are intrinsically sensuous but in an alienated way. In a capitalist society, we have to use money as a means of satiating almost every demand. The majority of our actions are motivated by the desire to either make money, position ourselves to make money, or increase our ability to make money. Almost everything that a person could ever want is available to us as a potential purchase item when it comes to cash transactions. As a result, we seldom approach the things we are involved in from the perspective of their inherent worth or, more broadly, the value of humanity. Most of the time, we don't relate to most things in terms of their innately beautiful and sensuous reality. Thus, even at the level of sense and perception, the demands of capitalist society permeate our conscious and semi-conscious experiences. Marx refers to this as the alienation from our subjective human sensitivities. He argues that only humans are capable of producing a conscious sense of the laws of beauty. However, under alienation, sensation experience becomes a malleable sign for objects and interactions that can be converted into money. We no longer see things with an eye towards their inherent beauty because we view everything through the lens of how useful they are to the further reproduction of capital. Even with ourselves, we are less capable of sensing and appreciating the inherent aspects of things. The dehumanization of perception, judgment, and the senses is integral to the dehumanization of people. The fourth and final form of alienation is alienation from the society. This brings us to the fourth feature of alienation, which is isolation from society or other individuals. When the traditional community is destroyed, people are reduced to potentially dangerous or helpful objects. There emerges a new meaning to having enemies. Man becomes a wolf to man only when primitive communism collapses. Primitive communities did exhibit wolf-like behavior, but it had never been the norm in those societies. It does end up being a reality in class societies and becomes their organizing principle. Not only does the class rivalry intensify in the market, but the interpersonal hostility too. Marx argues that the best way to understand human nature is as the ensemble of social relations. Selfish behavior is not solely a result of our genetic makeup. Marx believed that we live in a society where each person must recognize the limitations of their own liberty rather than its possibility in others. Everyone else turns into a hurdle for each other, but more importantly, the client, customer, debtor, creditor, employer, or employee also become necessary obstacles. In medieval society, a person's predetermined social standing had a direct bearing on their life activities. However, this was accompanied with a cohesive link that united the people of the different strata. The relationship between the lord and the peasant was one of direct personal allegiance and mutual duty and even affection. Peasant exploitation was a fundamental aspect of patriarchal relationships. Such society's solidarity was nevertheless a solidarity, while being a pseudo solidarity founded on exploitation. The market society works to sever the patriarchal ties that bind the master and the peasant. Every person must rely only on their own abilities to either succeed or fail in making a wealth. The currency nexus replaces the patriarchal ties that bind lord and peasant, lord, and peasant in a market society. A relationship of personal indifference is substituted for the personal one. Cash is the main component of this contractual arrangement. In the past, the worker served the community either directly or by being personally subservient to his boss. This subservience of labor was considered a necessary characteristic of a community that was considered to possess the unity. It was believed that the subordination of organs to one another was the only way community could exist. Now let us discuss alienation with respect to the state. There is a clear link between Marx's criticism of the state and his ideas on social alienation, even if he does not declare this immediately in the 1844 manuscripts. On the Jewish Question is a book which deals with this issue further. Marx believed that the state's very existence necessitates a situation of political estrangement. Marxian ideas of the state being abolished or fading away frequently elicit the same kind of perplexed response as if the sun, moon, and stars had all been abolished. However, Marx defined the state as the collection of institutions created to keep an increasingly disintegrating society together. Deeper societal conflicts that are, in theory, amenable to resolution are what give rise to the state. It is a result of the inherent personal conflicts that exist in class societies, but it is also a result of the division of classes themselves and the potential for open conflict. When society can no longer hold itself together by other methods or before it has regained the ability to do so, the state becomes an essential tool for coordination and coercion. The state is not something neutral that can stand aloofly above all specific interests. Rather, it is an essential component of class society, neither outside nor above it. While Hegelian theorists contend that individuals were truly at peace and united in the modern state, Marx argues that the state is only required as a result of the actual conflicts that class societies create and maintain among people. Furthermore, people do not actually find a community of equals in the contemporary liberal or even democratic capitalist state. Rather, in the state, they unite to refute the inequality that characterize their actual existence in the social and economic spheres. They are actually divided, therefore, their illusion of unity inside the state's political community is unfounded. It is said that the political relationships between free and equal individuals in a bourgeois society restore the solidarity of previous, more organic forms of society. However, this is a pseudo-solidarity because of the numerous significant disparities that exist outside of the legally recognized formal equality, as well as the ability of the wealthy and powerful to influence the state to act primarily in their best interests. People only need to unite in an idealized, fake unity as nominally equal citizens, since in reality there one genuine connection, the money nexus is isolating them from one another. This is where the idea of a double or inverted world first emerges, which is crucial to Marx's later concept of commodity fetishism. In order to reconcile and clarify a contradictory reality, a deceptive reality is created and placed, so to speak, on top of the first one. The ideas that the state is the only entity that can keep a human society together and that it can accomplish this while upholding and expressing the freedom and equality of all of its inhabitants are illusory. The state is an example of an illusory reality. It exists because people mistakenly believe that the conflicts in bourgeois society are inherent, unavoidable, timeless, and fundamental to human nature. Furthermore, it is a genuine delusion that is essential to bourgeois society. Therefore, the state cannot be eliminated by the will of a few, as certain anarchists would have it. Class society must first undergo transformation and eventually be abolished in order for the state to be abolished. The primary purpose of the state is to preserve society as it already exists, that is, as a society built on class distinctions, originating from the processes of the production and reproduction of material life. However, the end of class society and its condition would not mean that political divisions or their necessity would vanish. If by politics we mean people talking to one another and working together to resolve conflicts between human wants and societal situations, then if anything, politics would be more common than ever. Marx would not refer to such mechanisms by which people choose shared policies and resolve conflicts as the state. In conclusion, we can say that Marx developed his theory of alienation on the premises of his critique of capitalism, wherein he discussed how the dehumanization of workers and their products leads to a production and reproduction of capital. In the process of accumulating wealth and generating profits, the workers are alienated and dehumanized from all aspects of their human existence. This understanding of an integral feature of capitalist societies continues to remain a remarkable contribution of Marx towards envisioning a just and egalitarian future. With this, we conclude today's lecture. Hope you benefited from listening to it. Thank you.